Good evening. This is Donna Blomquist, librarian at the LaSalle Public Library. Welcome to tonight's program, How Art Tells the Christmas Stories. Before we begin, just a few reminders. On Tuesday, January 9th at 6 p.m. Central Time, the library will be starting the new year virtually with Jasmine Cho, founder of Yummyholic, an online bakery specializing in amazing treats, most notably portrait cookies that depict someone special in the customer's life. But even more, Cho creates portrait cookies that highlight the lives of marginalized figures from American history, and she writes curricula for schools that support that history. Her work has been exhibited at the Heinz History Center in tandem with the Smithsonian's National Portrait Gallery and featured internationally on NPR, CBS This Morning, and the Korea Daily. She is also a Food Network champion and a TEDx speaker. And on January 23rd, as a partner in the Illinois Humanities Big Read, a statewide multi-event humanities program, the library will host an in-person film viewing and follow-up discussion event at 6 p.m. in the library meeting room. A PBS Frontline film, Poor Kids, explores how poverty affects children in America. The film will be followed by a conversation between Chris Merritt, Executive Director of the Illinois Institute for Rural Affairs, and Vanessa Hofeditz, Community Services Food Pantry Manager at Tri-County Opportunities Council. The program will also be live streamed on YouTube. This film program will support the book discussion groups held earlier in January at the Oglesby Public Library, a Big Read partner. The book to be discussed, Heartland, a memoir and New York Times bestseller by Sarah Smarsh. It focuses on how economic class dictates everything from job safety and healthcare to housing and education, and takes a look at small town and rural settings and the availability of necessary resources. If you would like to participate in the book discussions, please contact us at the LaSalle Public Library or contact Lynn Sheedy, Director at the Oglesby Public Library. Copies of Heartland are available at both libraries and in the system. And as always, all library programming is free and open to the public and shareable, so please feel free to pass the information on to others. Now tonight, we welcome art historian Laura Mueller, presenting How Art Tells the Christmas Stories. Laura? We don't have you up yet on microphone, Laura.
Okay.
There you are. Great.
Yeah.
Welcome.
Hi, thank you. And thanks everybody for coming. In a minute, I'm going to show you a lot of what I hope you agree will be beautiful slides. But I thought before I did that, if you can see me well enough, I just wanted to point out, I have a little children's book here, but it shows you the kinds of things we may be seeing as we see more complicated paintings. There were, of course, altarpieces that had outer panels like this, and then were opened up on special occasions. We're going to see this one. This is the Portinari altarpiece, to show often color pictures inside, black and white on normal days, color with different story inside on festival days, on feast days or holidays. So just remember, if you see this kind of format where something's divided often into three parts, sometimes there's a long skinny part down below, which was called the predella, with little pictures below a giant picture like this. You'll be seeing parts of things like this, but I will show you with slides first. So let me go to my share screen. Oh, and I should say, I've talked to people at LaSalle before. I've been happy to come sometimes to the library, and I've done talks on Zoom before. I teach drawing classes on Zoom. I lecture different places. I lectured at the Art Institute of Chicago for a while, and I lectured for the Humanities Council for a while too. So I have some experience. Let's hope that gets me through the night tonight. So here we go. I'm going to take you to my slideshow. And let me pull this up so I can see it well. I'm going to press play. I want to talk at the very beginning about some things that were surprising to me as I read about Christmas again. I've talked about Christmas art before, but I forget that Christmas was not always celebrated, or celebrated certainly the way we celebrate it in the United States. We're going to be looking in this lecture at slides of art from the early Christian times, a few, medieval times, Renaissance pictures from both the North, which would be primarily Flanders and Holland in this case, and also from the South, especially Italian Renaissance pictures, because the period coincided with a great deal of interest among their public in having pictures that told the story of Christmas. And we'll also go into the Baroque period, which would be the time of Rembrandt and Georges de la Tour. But just a little bit, we'll just dip our toes in there. And there's actually one painting, if I get to it, from 1899, but that's the closest I come to even the 20th century. So we're looking at the beginnings of how Christmas was depicted, how the story of Christmas was told in art. And what this picture reminds me, this is a picture by Giotto, an artist from, this picture is from the mid-1290s. It's a picture of St. Francis of Assisi, who's down here. The picture's somewhat scratched off because it's a fresco on a wall. So whatever's happened to the wall has happened to the picture of St. Francis too. But it marks a significant moment in the celebration of Christmas, because St. Francis here is setting up a little doll, although in some people say it's a miracle and we're seeing the baby Jesus, but he's setting up a doll in a little crush scene, and he had live animals there, seemingly an ox and an ass, although they're very, very small for that. They may have some other animal dressed up as that. And he would act out the scene for the public. The public are coming in here through the door. This is actually backstage at a church. You're seeing the back of the pulpit here and the back of the crucifix that would have been facing the congregation. So we're kind of seeing behind the scenes where St. Francis sets this up for his fellow monks and for the public, because he wanted people to have a sort of emotional connection with the events that were being told. But this also reminds me to say that Christmas itself was not celebrated on December 25th always. For a long time, what we would think of as a Christmas celebration was celebrated on January 6th, which is called Epiphany. And in the Eastern Church, that held on for even longer. And by Eastern Church, I mean, say, Byzantine, Eastern Orthodox Church, when the two churches split, the Christian churches. So they held on to that tradition for a long time. But in the West, after the year 354, the Nativity was established as December 25th, and then the Adoration of the Magi, or the Three Kings, was set up as to be celebrated on January 6th. So it was an evolving tradition, and you'll see maybe some evolution in the pictures too, although you certainly will see traditions being repeated here. Now, this launches us right away into a much later picture from the Northern Renaissance. This is a picture by Peter Bruegel the Elder. And it, of course, if you're thinking about the Holy Land, where these events originally took place, you're not seeing that here, because we're seeing snow and iced over rivers that people are walking on or playing on, as you see here. This is a typical Bruegel picture of daily life in a town that he would have known. But included in here is a reference to ancient events as well as a political message. So if you look through the people depicted here, there are all kinds of interesting things going on: people falling on the ice, people skating, people playing, people delivering things, and people gathering here around the building. We'll see a close-up of that in a minute. But right in sort of in the center here is, and I'll show you a close-up, is a figure that may be familiar to you from Christmas lore and legend. This is Mary riding on the donkey, but with the ox right next to her, and Joseph here with a saw to show that he's a carpenter. So somehow we're to imagine Mary and Joseph coming into the scene of a contemporary Flemish town at the time of Bruegel. And this is a little bit akin to St. Francis's motives of making people feel that these events were real and tangible and of concern to them. Now, if we go one slide further, you'll see what all the people were gathering around the building for. there are people here whose names are being written down in this book. These are officials here. And you'll also see that people are paying taxes. So remember that the beginning of the traditional Christmas story is that Mary, who was pregnant, and Joseph had to go to Joseph's hometown of Bethlehem to be registered for the census. And the census had to do with Rome wanting to know how many people there were and how many taxes they could get out of the people. Now, this had a relevance for the people of Bruegel's day, because they were ruled also by another power. They were ruled by Spain at that point, and Spain was imposing heavy taxes. So this scene of people gathering to be counted and to pay their taxes would have been familiar and would have been a cause of probably a sort of anger among the populace who viewed the picture, because not at the picture, but at the Spanish dictators rulers who were demanding payment. You see the Habsburg insignia here up here on this inn, and you see a wreath also to mark that it is a place of an inn. But right around this time, the people of Flanders were coming up with a rebellion against Spain and saying they wouldn't pay the taxes. And Spain was coming in with military forces and putting down their insurrection quite forcefully. So that's the political message which Bruegel's sort of comparing to the situation of the Jews who had to go and register in their birthplaces. And remember too, that Bethlehem, to which Mary and Joseph were going, and we see them here in the background, was associated with the house of David, because Joseph was of that lineage. This is just a little bit of a big picture we're going to see later with lots of parts. It's one of the fancy altarpieces. It's by Hugo van der Goes. But what you're seeing here is Mary and Joseph just as a distant view with, and I love this. I love the ass and the donkey coming around the corner with them, and Mary walking very, very carefully over this rugged terrain as they are heading towards Bethlehem. Below them, much bigger, are figures that you'll eventually see in a larger painting. They are patron saints of the people who commissioned this painting. So we're seeing St. Thomas, because the main commissioner was Tommaso Portinari, an Italian. And we see St. Anthony, who is the namesake or the patron saint of Tommaso's son, Anthony. So they're big, but they're not the main figures. Actually, in this story of this painting, Mary and Joseph will turn out to be much more significant. But we see them at various moments all in the same painting, as you'll see in a while. Now, of course, the main event was that Mary and Joseph were traveling with lots of other people who had to return to birthplaces. And so when they got to lodgings, the traditional story is that they were told, "We're sorry, there is no room at the inn. You're going to have to find somewhere else." And Joseph particularly had to go into action to try to make sure that Mary, who seemed close to the time of giving birth, had somewhere to stay. Now, there's this is a manuscript by the master of Mary of Burgundy, who was not Mary, the mother of Christ, but a ruler in Burgundy, who had commissioned a beautiful book of hours with illustrations like this, beautiful floral frame around the picture, and once again showing them in a non-Near Eastern setting, but in a setting that would have been familiar to the people of Flanders. Here, though, we may be getting an artist. The artists were the Limbourg brothers of France, or Flanders at the time, of the shelter that Joseph found. And there, as I said, there was disagreement in the stories about what was the shelter. Some people say it was this thing called a tugurium, a kind of ruined shed. In other cases, this is associated with like a ruin of a palace of David, or the ruin of the birthplace of King David. But in this case, we're seeing it as a kind of shed, and you get a manger where the ox and the ass can eat straw. But you notice, while there is straw in there, it's a very fancy thing for a ruined shed that has holes in the windows. Many people who analyze these pictures say there was a desire by the religious establishment to remind people, even of the, who are witnessing this joyful event of the birth of the child, that there would be a sacrifice at the end. So some people even say this looks like a sarcophagus where a dead body could be laid, or some people associate with an altar where the sacrifice would be laid. You're seeing some traditional things that you're going to see in a lot of pictures. You see Joseph off to the side, holding his head in his hand, maybe full of worry. Sometimes he's asleep. In this case, he's awake and trying to keep things going, putting a pot on the fire. And you're seeing the shepherds who have seen the star up here in this fabulous stylized starry sky with blue and sort of golden fleur-de-lis. And then the main star of Bethlehem that has been pointed out to them when they were up guarding their flocks at night. And they've found their way down to be the first non-family visitors to this famous scene, what will become a famous scene. Now, this picture was done the same year, we think, as that one by the Limburg brothers, 1405, but it looks so very, very different. This is a picture from the Eastern Church. It could be, you could even call it an icon. And it's actually by a Russian painter, and he's following the established traditions of the Eastern Church. In the Eastern Church, you notice we don't see any little shed or ruined building. Instead, we see a cave. And in some of the traditional accounts, Joseph could not find any place but a cave that shepherds had used to hide in during the night or to find shelter in during the night. So when Mary was about to give birth, he took them to the cave to be safe. You see here, though, again, the fancy manger where the ox and the ass are breathing on the baby who's been born, but we're not seeing the birth for various reasons. The traditional way that the Eastern Church would represent this is to show Mary stretched out on what they call a mattress. It looks almost like a blow-up mattress in a way, but on some kind of cloth to support her. And strangely to us, perhaps, she's actually turning away from her baby and seems lost in thought. Many people say this is Mary meditating on what has just happened, what's going to happen to my child, on many of the many strange things that have been told to her by angels, for instance. We see Joseph still down here in the corner, separated from the event in a sense. Some people claim that Joseph is shown all by himself this way in some pictures to show that he was not the father. He was not the official father of the child that's been born. And here, this little man who's done smaller scale than Joseph because he's not as important as Joseph is, or Mary, this is sometimes said to be a patriarch appearing from the past to reassure Joseph, who has doubts about what's going on here. How is my wife giving birth at this point when I haven't been involved? Other people say this figure that looks wrapped in clothes that look like a shepherd's is the devil masquerading as a shepherd who's come to whisper slander about Mary and to make Joseph more doubtful. Nevertheless, the rest of the participants ignore this scene. This may be why Joseph is so downcast, though. We see shepherds coming here to view what's happening. We see the three kings, or the magi, riding up the hills in the distance, and we see two groups of angels who are watching to see what is happening. The figures that may seem most strange to you are these two women. And notice one woman is pouring water into a vessel. The other woman is holding the baby. So the baby appears twice in this picture. These are the midwives. And actually, they're some of my favorite characters, but you're not going to find the midwives mentioned in the official books of the official gospels, say, or the official books from the Bible. These are figures who came in because people who loved the story wanted to know more. And so they sometimes wrote their own books. There were legends about this. The legend involved here is that Joseph, when Mary's time was coming due, Joseph was worried. And he told her, you lie here, I'm going to go off and find midwives to help you give birth. He came back, but the midwives were too late. Mary had already given birth, but the midwives stayed around to wash the baby, to prepare the baby for, to get the afterbirth off the baby. And we'll see them again. So I'll talk more about them in a little while. Here in a picture by Giotto, who did the very first picture we saw, a picture in a chapel in Padua in Italy, we see a more Western version. Now you might say, well, it could be a kind of cave because there are mountains of a sort behind this little rustic structure, but the structure looks a lot like the Tugurium that we saw already and that we're going to see over and over again. This time in the more Western church, Mary turns solicitously towards her baby, looks at him with concern and love. And we still have probably one of the midwives like bringing the baby back after its bath to Mary to look after. Joseph by this time is asleep, but the ox and the ass are quite attentive. And of course, in some versions of in some of the legends, the ox and the ass actually kneel down to the baby. The shepherds are here brought by the angels. So we have a somewhat non-realistic background, but really, if you compare this to this version, this is from 1405. This is from 1305. Really, Giotto, you see why Giotto got his reputation as leading to the rebirth sort of painting in the West, because he's moving ahead in so many ways, certainly in depicting emotion. Now, this one is a little bit more doll-like. This is from an artist from the Northern Renaissance. We think it might be by Melchior Broderlam, but it's not certain. It is an assigned piece. This would be from about 1400, and you see again the mattress, which this time has a very fancy pattern on it. Mary lying again, kind of lost in sort of recovering from the birth, and a midwife here who's given a halo, interestingly, although she wasn't supposed to be a holy figure, taking care of the baby over here in the manger with the ox and the ass looking on. Now, Joseph is very interesting in this picture because instead of being glum and drawn into himself, he's busy mending his sock or his boot. Or some people say he's taking the boot apart to make a blanket for the baby because he was concerned. He wanted to keep the child warm. Underneath Mary's mattress, you see little pieces of wheat because it was also said that Joseph got busy gathering plant materials to make her more comfortable. And of course, up above, you have a figure of God looking on, watching this, sort of holding the orb of the world as he shares in this scene. This is a very famous one, more famous than the last one. This is by a man named Robert Campin, who was called the Master of Flamal. And there was a lot of discussion about who he was because you can see that we've moved forward in terms of what an artist is able to do, even though this is just 1425, just 25 years after the previous picture. But there's so much more realism in the way the landscape is shown and even in the way the people are shown. Nevertheless, he has to include some of the traditional parts, the shed in this case, which may be backing onto a cave. He lets the shed's dilapidated walls let you see the ox and the asses back here behind. The shepherds have come with instruments like bagpipes to play. And that's not a tradition that was in the Bible. It was in the apocryphal books, that the shepherds would, of course, play music because they played music to entertain themselves. Up in the fields, they entertained their flocks. And so they might have brought instruments to entertain the baby that was announced to them. And these are the angels who've been announcing things to everyone. But in this case, they are talking not to Joseph, who's carrying a candle so that Mary can see what's going on, not to Mary, who's now down on her knees on the ground, and they're not talking to the baby Jesus either. They're talking to the midwives. These scrolls, which is a very old-fashioned touch in this picture, tell you what they're saying. The two midwives are differentiated one from the other. One, the one whose back we're seeing, believes that there's been a virgin birth and is falling on her knees to worship the baby. The other midwife is doubtful. Her name was Salome. She's not the famous Salome who did the dance, but her name was Salome. And she says, I will not believe that a virgin could give birth unless you allow me to inspect the mother. And Mary, in some stories, actually says, go ahead, inspect me if you want. But the angel says to Salome, touch the boy and you shall be healed. Now, there's a healing in terms of her lack of belief, But there's something else that happens. When Salome touches Mary, her hand withers up. Now, this may seem very odd to devout people, devout Christians. So like, why would Mary or Jesus cause somebody's hand to wither up? But this is a legendary source. So the idea is that her disbelief takes a physical form. But sure enough, when she touches the baby, and actually she doesn't touch him, according to the story, she touches the hem of his diaper and she's cured. Her hand is cured again. So there's this miracle of the midwives here going on. I should mention too, I hope you can see that there are little golden rays, which would have been done with gold leaf, coming from the baby, because this is a new vision from the 14th century of how someone imagined, how a saint imagined that Mary gave birth. And that someone was named Saint Bridget of Sweden. She was a widow who was very devout. She had visions. And in this case, we're seeing a vision of Mary and probably Jesus up in heaven, sending her a direct vision while she's attending at a service. Now, St. Bridget's vision became very, very important in Europe. The story was told all over. She was eventually, after her death, named like one of the patron saints of Europe, and it certainly had a big influence on art. Her vision was that when it came time for Mary to give birth, Mary took off her shoe. Sometimes you see the shoe in the background. She took her veil off. She took her cloak off, and the angels here are holding the cloak. Then Mary, according to St. Bridget, fell to her knees, and boop, the baby was there, seemingly without coming out of Mary. Here it seems to come right from, heaven. The baby's almost like falling with the light that the baby's giving off. And the baby is born. Mary is still intact, it's still a virgin birth, but there's the baby on the ground. And it's a way also of making Mary and the baby of the people, because she's not sitting on a throne, as she sometimes is in some pictures. Neither is the baby in her arms presented as a royal prince, say. They're both on the ground. These are marks of their humility. And yet the other significant part of St. Bridget's vision was that the baby gave off light. So for instance, back 2 pictures ago, when Joseph came running up with his candle, they didn't even really need it because the heavenly light emitted by the baby outshone the candle. That was how the story went. Now, this led to a lot of artists being interested in depicting the picture this way and showing Mary on her knees and the baby on the ground. The ox and the ass are almost kneeling. Yeah, they are kneeling down there to worship the baby. Joseph's asleep. He's had it. It's been a long, long, long day. But out here in the distance are the shepherds who are seeing the angel who appears to them as a bright light that's going to lead them to this area. And we see that even though it's night, the baby is emitting so much light that everything is lit up halfway. The shadows make sense too, given that this is the source of light. And of course, here are my favorite 2 midwives, one of them seemingly asleep and one of them curious and wanting to see what's going on. So the little touches that appeal to common people who know that normally midwives are associated with a birth continue in these pictures. This is a picture, now I have to double check, by Gentile da Fabriano. And this is a little long, narrow picture that would have been put beneath a much bigger picture that we will see later in the talk. They were all parts of an altarpiece, the big picture for the congregation farther back in the church, the little pictures on the predella for those who were officiating at the service, like the priest and servers. Now, again, we see Mary in the light emitted by the baby, and the angels even are in the light emitted by the baby. We still see the angel appearing in the sky as a light, but we also see the light of the fire that the shepherds made to keep themselves warm before all this started happening. And you see some of the shepherds standing here getting the Annunciation. But this is not a shepherd coming in, this is Joseph. So in this version by Jürgen Tatz St. John's, a very accomplished artist, but one who died in his 30s, so we don't have a lot of paintings by him. St. Joseph is seen as a younger man and is sort of interested in the events that are going on here. If you look carefully, you also see the ox and the ass. And you see that this idea of the baby giving off light and the idea that the birth happened at night, I think at midnight, they sometimes say, led to a whole series of the nativity at night pictures. And by late Renaissance, you get Correggio just really playing up the idea of the glow of the baby, so bright that the midwives have to put up their hands to shield their eyes from the bright light. The shepherds come in and are amazed by the light. We see probably Joseph holding back the donkey from going up close. And you see this swarm of angels up above who are also swarming in the light. So the light becomes a symbol of the presence of God in these terms. They even say when the birth was announced to the shepherds on the hills, the phrase, the glory of the Lord shone around them, that phrase was a phrase that was used all the way back in Old Testament times to indicate that God was present, say, in above the, I can't think of the thing that's called, as the Jews went on their travels, it would be over the tabernacle to indicate the presence of the Lord, and it would be a light that was shining to indicate that. So the artist used that as an excuse, in a way, to show their pictures at night and to show off what they could do with a night picture, which was really quite extraordinary. Now, this led in the Baroque era to a picture like this by Georges de la Tour, a very famous French artist who is following in the steps of Caravaggio, where again you have the brightest light on the baby, although St. Joseph still has his candle, and you get the shepherds crowding in. I'm pretty sure that this is the midwife because she's holding the bowl of water for the bathing. And Mary, it's always interesting to me, Mary's sort of suspicious look, like, who are all these people? Is my baby safe? That sort of feeling is what I get from this picture, but it may just be deep meditation. Now, we also have pictures, of course, just of the shepherds. This was part of another altarpiece, a very early one. We're back in the 1300s now. This is an artist named Taddeo Gaddi, and this is called the Annunciation to the Shepherds. This would be about 1328 for a chapel in Florence. And you can see that while the figures may not be as anatomically developed as you would see later in the Renaissance, they're quite convincing. And I am very impressed by the way he depicts the lights and darks of the night scene. There is a damage in the fresco here. You know, frescoes were painted right as part of the wall in wet plaster. So this is not meant to be there, but the rest of it is original. And you even have the animals in a sort of shadow, even the dog, the shepherd's dog, looking up, worrying about what is happening. Because remember, of course, that the traditional words for the angel are, fear not, because I bring you good tidings of great joy. So there is a feeling that perhaps this supernatural event was frightening to people on the hills. And Rembrandt was one artist who really played that up. We have the whole sky opening up here with the angel announcing, and then the angels surrounding her singing and praising glory to God in the highest. The shepherds down here, if you look either startled or very afraid. There's one who's running away. And in fact, the cattle are either bridling at this great burst of light in the middle of the night or are running away. So the angel's admonition, fear not, is to be, is believable because it is a strange supernatural event that's going on here. And of course, Rembrandt was famous for being able to deal with these dark darks and bright brights. That was very much a part of his art. Here we're back in Italy with not as much emphasis on darks and lights. These are meant to be the angels in the sky, like the angels we saw in Rembrandt's sky, circling above a scene that's down below. And these were, I think, painted on the ceiling. I couldn't verify that, but one book said that they were painted on the ceiling. So I liked the idea that there was a whole a whole chapel being painted with angels on the ceiling, nativity scene below. Now, since we were talking about the shepherds, I have to continue. This is a little bit of one of those big pictures that I told you you were going to see, and we'll see the whole thing, I think, in a minute. Because I can show you a close-up, you see again that the shepherds are somewhat afraid here with the angel announcing the news to them. But other shepherds are running up to see the baby who is on the ground. And you see that the shepherds are seen by Hugo van der Goes, a Northern Renaissance artist, in a very realistic way. They're not ideal, elegant, beautiful people. They're common people, and there's an attempt to differentiate them one from another, to give them personalities and different kinds of faces. It's also interesting that even though we do have more shepherds back here behind them, there are 3 main shepherds, and they seem even to be of 3 different ages. Now that will become important when we look at pictures of the 3 kings. So let's go forward. Here is the entire picture, and I'm going to limit this because I want to see the whole picture as we talk about it. This is the famous Portinari altarpiece. Now, there's been always in art history a lot of talk about who influenced whom. Did the Northerners influence the Southerners, or did the Italians lead the way and influence the Northerners? But in this case, this is a Northern picture that was commissioned by this man, Tommaso Portinari, that I mentioned to you before. He is obviously an Italian. He had this picture done by a Northern artist, and he brought it on for display in Florence. And it was so famous that people like Botticelli and Ghirlandaio, some of the famous Italian artists, were marveling over it and talking about it and were influenced by it. Now, here again, we get St. Bridget's vision acted out in the center panel. We have Mary on her knees. She's very, very tall here, but I think part of this is her dress spread out on the ground. And we have the baby lying flat on the ground, but emitting rays of light. Admittedly, this is not really a night picture, although you get real depths in this space behind Mary, where the ox and the ass are. And I might as well tell you now, this is going to drive you crazy, but there are theories that back here in this darkness, there is a figure of the devil who is actually wanting to see what is happening. Now, I've looked at close-ups of this. I haven't seen this painting in person, but it looks like a scrawny figure, sort of scratched, sort of monster-like in the darkness here. It's hard to make out that it's a figure, but the theories of some art historians is that the devil himself is here witnessing. Whereas all these other figures, the angels, are dressed up as celebrants of a mass. You have, the officiating priest with a much more elaborate robe. You have the 2 in the white albs, and you have some in blue. And, I should mention too, before I go on, that in this case, the 2 wings contain the donor and his sons, and his wife and daughter, and their patron saints, which include Mary Magdalene, because the wife's name was Mary. I wish I could show you a close-up of this. I don't think I got one. But back here are the 3 kings sending out a scout to try to find out where the baby is. This is the scout, and the kings are much more in the distance. But I want to show you a little bit of the detail of the front of this picture. So let's go forward, if I can. Here at Mary's feet, this is part of her dress, and you see the little feet of the baby, are significant objects, because a lot of this art had to do with symbolic things. So all of these things on the ground were part of the symbolism of what was happening. For instance, the little violets on the ground, and notice they're close, most of them, there is a white violet, but they're mostly close to Mary's dark dress. These indicate humility, because a violet is small and stays near the ground. It's not showy. It's not showy like the iris. The iris are there, believe it or not, because of their spear-like leaves. And there was a prediction by Simeon, to whom Jesus was presented in the temple, that a sword would pierce Mary's heart. Now, this was allegorical, but what he meant was that she was going to have a great sorrow. So these are here to remind us of the sorrow that would come eventually, as are the red lilies, because red is the color of the Passion. These 7 columbine can be seen as symbols of the dove, maybe the Holy Spirit, but they also could be seen as the 7 sorrows of Mary. They're not counting the buds, they're just counting the full plant, the flowers here. And the wheat is there to symbolize that there is a sacrifice that's going to happen, just as, it's a sacrifice of the food, of the grain, and Christ is seen as the bread because of the Eucharist, the host, as the bread that people would eat that would save them. So there's this interest in adding something that's not just decorative, but also symbolic of the metaphor that Christ is the bread for people to eat. And also, actually, to name this place as Bethlehem, because the word Bethlehem means house of bread. So there are lots of layers of meaning in here. Now we're getting to all the really complicated ones. So here is Botticelli, who so much liked that last picture, that he did a mystic nativity. So it's not the traditional nativity, although we see features of it. And if I could talk to you, I'm sure you'd tell me, yes, there's the cave. There are the animals. The baby's on the ground. Mary is kneeling. The shed is there, although it's backed up against the cave. And there are angels, but they're circling in a symbol of eternity. And we actually have, I don't think you can see it in this picture, but Botticelli actually wrote on this picture to try to explain what was happening. There had been troubles in Italy, and he said, I painted at the end of the year 1500 during the trouble in Italy in the halftime after the time which was prophesied. So that is in the year 1500. 500 is half of the 1000. And during the time of the second woe of the apocalypse, when the devil was loosed upon the earth for 3 years and a half, afterward he shall be put in chains according to the 12th woe, and we shall see him trodden underfoot as in this picture. Now, I bet I didn't do close-ups of this. This is going to be another one. Let me see. I don't think I did. No. You're going to have to look really carefully. Botticelli, whom we think of as doing a lot of mythological pictures, pagan subjects, say the birth of Venus, also was devoutly religious. And he was influenced by the monk that was known as Savonarola, who had all of Florence in his grip for a while, but was eventually executed. And so Botticelli is painting this after Savonarola has been put to death, but he's looking forward to a better time, a time after the Troubles, when angels will embrace human beings and all people will be, all beings will be gathered together, but not the little devils. So you'll have to take my word for it. Down here, there's a little devil, you probably see his horns, who's trying to squeeze himself into a crack in the earth. And over here too, and what I used to think was a root from the tree is another devil that's more in human form that's trying to squeeze in under the rocks to escape, because it's no longer the time when the devil will rule. That was Botticelli's idea. Now, in an earlier work by Jacopo Bellini, a drawing, he'd never put this into a painting as far as we know. We again see the symbols associated with the event. We see the traditional iconography, which means Mary on her knees, baby on the ground, ox and ass, Joseph asleep. We see the shed, and we even see, I think these are meant to be the shepherds arriving. But there are lots of strange things. Like over here, the trees are young and quite alive. Over here, the trees are dead, like it's winter. This is supposed to be a picture of, we think, about the changeover of the epoch. This is the old dispensation, the old time dying away. These are the trees of the new dispensation, the new era, the new millennium starting, right? Although they wouldn't have said that at that time. And the world is sort of divided by this road between the two. The road is also interesting to me because we're going to be seeing a bunch of pictures now of the shepherds coming down from the hills, maybe not on a road, but many pictures of the 3 kings riding on the road. And then I'm reminded that, of course, Mary and Joseph took the road to Bethlehem, 90 miles from where they were living to get to Bethlehem. And eventually they had to flee into Egypt. So there's this theme of travel, strangely enough, within a lot of these pictures. Now, here is an ancient prophet. Well, he's in the Bible, but he's not really a prophet. He's not accepted by the Jews. He's not accepted by the Christians, but they talk about him. His name was Balaam or Balaam. And he was, we think, something like a Persian astrologer or magician. And of course, the Magi could be magicians themselves, but this is a person from a time long before the birth of Christ who predicted to a ruler that he was in conflict with. He said, "We shall see him, but not today." And I believe a star is also mentioned in Balaam's prophecy. So this is a print. This is just a very simple print that would have been easy to distribute, print up many copies to populace who were interested in this idea that the Star of Bethlehem was fulfilling this prophecy that was in the Old Testament, even if it didn't come from a Jew or, or anyone of the chosen people, say. Now, here, I put this picture next because some mystical event is going on in two of the side panels. In both, people are looking at something in the sky. Now, here, I'm sure you can tell that these are the three magi, the three wise men, looking up at the Star of Bethlehem, which is what they followed to get to the place where Christ was being born. In the star appears the baby, a figure of the baby. This reminds me, because we're going to talk about the Magi pretty soon, some people thought that each magus, or each king, as they were called later, may have had a different vision of the star. They were from different countries. They look different. As you can see here, they're different ages. There's an old king, a mature king, and a young king who's beardless. And eventually, well, we'll see how their iconography developed, what they symbolized. In the middle, you have lots of the events that we've seen before. There's just one figure that needs to be explained. This man, Bladelin, Peter Bladelin, who paid for the picture and wanted to be included right in the center. Now, this is not typical. Normally, he would be over on one side. But no, Roger van der Weyden the artist agreed to let him be in the main picture. And I should also mention one other thing here. You look at this falling apart shed and you think, what's this fancy column doing in here? Well, one of the descriptions of the moment when Mary gave birth was that she leaned against a pillar or a column to support her when she felt the pangs of childbirth. So there's some discrepancy, like, did Mary feel childbirth pangs, or was she just feeling overwhelmed by the event? And it has to do with different views of how she was the mother of Jesus. You also see down here these strange holes in the ground that indicate that there are grottos down there, which may be an allusion actually to the cave, although they're not somewhere where humans would really want to go. Then on the far left, you're seeing an announcement to the official Roman establishment. This is the Emperor Augustus. The Emperor Augustus was much acclaimed because he had brought a time of peace. And so many Romans wanted to make him a god. And he supposedly, according to legend, he consulted with a Sibyl. I'm sorry, didn't mean to do that. A prophetess. She was the Tibertine. She was the Sibyl of the Tiber, the river Tiber. And he said to her, I need to know, they're saying I'm really great. Will another person greater than I am come along? And she said, yes, and I will show you a vision in the sky. And what he saw was Mary seated almost as a kind of throne on which the little baby sat. And there is another kind of throne-like structure here. And so Augustus himself falls to his knees and says, no, I don't want to be a god. I am not as great as this one who is to come. So it was an announcement to different parts of the world of the birth of the baby. Now, this is a wonderful one. This is by the Limburg brothers, who did the manuscripts that I showed you before, the famous books of hours for wealthy people who wanted to remember significant events at certain times of the year. This is the processions of the three kings arriving from different points in the world at what was called a Montjoie, meaning a mountain of joy. It was said that these little structures were erected at spots high enough where if you were on a pilgrimage, you could see Jerusalem in the distance. The funny thing is, in this picture, because it was done in Flanders or northern France, the city we're seeing is not Jerusalem, but Paris. And people claim that they can recognize Notre Dame and Sainte-Chapelle, even a hill in Montmartre up here. But that was to make it, again, relevant to the people who owned the book. And then we see these fabulous processions of the kings arriving here in the center and meeting as if they had come from three different parts of the world. And you see the star above too, which would have been in gold leaf. The stories about the Magi are many and varied. In the official books, in the Gospels, there is no mention of how many Magi there were. In very early Christian accounts, there were 12 Magi, and they were people who had heard Balaam's prophecy, and would go up once a month on a mountaintop, like astronomers, to look to see if the star was there. And in some paintings, I couldn't find one, but in some paintings, you actually would see 12 Magi or 12 kings. Then later on, in the 300s, 400s, I think, the official church at that time looked through the writings and they said, wait a minute, what is mentioned in the gospel is that there were three gifts: gold, frankincense, and myrrh. So let's say there were three kings, there were three Magi, because that's what makes sense. They each brought something very, very special. But notice here already, there also is the tradition of showing one as an older man, one as a mature man with full black beard, and one as a beardless younger man. So already the popular imagination was going to work, like, what were they really like? What did they look like? Where did they come from? How did they differ? Now, this is a significant event that was put in a very small part of a tympanum on the entrance to a church in Germany, in Ulm, Germany. A cathedral, actually, but it's now called a minster because it was made into a Lutheran establishment during the Reformation. At any rate, you might be able to tell that what we're seeing here are the three kings who've ridden up with their retinue behind them, and they're encountering King Herod. King Herod, who was to fear the coming of the baby because he wanted to be the king of the Jews. He didn't want to hear that it was predicted that there would be a new king of the Jews. But Herod makes nice with them and he pretends that he wants to worship the baby too. So he says, please tell me where this baby is. Give me directions. Once you find the baby, come back to me and tell me where I can find him because I want to go and worship him too. And it isn't until the Magi have a miraculous dream that they realize they shouldn't trust Herod. Because, of course, Herod was going to be responsible for the massacre of the innocents. Now, traditionally, this is a mosaic from about 504 AD or CE of the three Magi. They're going towards, you see the hand there, they're angels surrounding Mary and the baby sitting in front of them. And this is the typical way to show them as sort of in a row, all traveling forward eagerly. They're all angling forward, so eager are they to bring their gifts, and the gifts are always in different receptacles because one has gold, one is frankincense, one is myrrh, to the baby. And of course, there's also a sense of their glamour because there were gold pieces in the mosaic that would glitter as you look at this. This is in Ravenna, Italy, and I actually have seen this. It's a beautiful church called Sant'Apollinare Nuovo, the new Apollinare church. But you also see this in churches elsewhere in the empire. This is, I believe, the church in Arles, France, that you might associate with Vincent van Gogh. This is this church of Saint Trophime. And in about 1170 or 1180, fabulous carvings were done on the front of this church. If you want to know, this is actually the angel trying to keep the door to paradise closed and people sorrowing about it, like we can't get in anymore. But the main event that I want you to see is down here. The three horses are the horses of the three kings who are now walking, and they're approaching Mary, who's holding a baby who's almost as big as she is, who's addressing and blessing the three kings who've come to offer their gifts. But notice that now the three kings are not doing the same gesture. The main one genuflects or kneels to the baby. He's right in front of the baby and the mother. And I think this may be intended to be a star, although it looks very flower-like, because these other decorations between the pillars are not the same. This king has turned and is saying, look, third king, look what I see. Look at the star. We're near to where the birth is taking place. And the other one holds up his hand in recognition, like, wow, I can see it. So even in very early pieces of art, you start to have an elaboration of the story of the three kings. Now, of course, people like the Medici family, the very wealthy banker family in Florence, they love to say that they were somehow related to one of the three kings. So they like to have fabulous exotic pictures of the adoration of the Magi, and this is one of them. This is the picture that was above that plain little dark scene of Christ being born with the light on the ground and the shadows where the two midwives were. But this is a much larger picture that is the altar, the main altarpiece picture, showing their fabulous processions to Jerusalem and then on to Bethlehem, showing the gifts they bring, including a monkey, an exotic gift, showing people in their retinue who aren't even paying attention to the main event. They're looking at these birds that are fighting, showing someone trying to fix the spurs on the youngest king. The oldest king is traditionally the one who kneels to the baby first, and here the baby greets him by patting him on his bald head affectionately. You have the second king preparing to doff his crown in recognition of the baby, and the youngest king about to give his gift. And then still showing up here are the two midwives who are examining one of the gifts. Notice this is a golden receptacle they have, like, is this a pretty good gift? What do you think this would cost? That kind of thing, to give, more plebeian interest to this fabulous regal scene. Here is another view by a different artist. That was Gentile da Fabriano for the last one. This is Benozzo Gozzoli, part of a complete chapel that was done to the three kings. This is the retinue just of the youngest king. But you're also seeing that doing this kind of fabulous processional picture allowed the artist to start being interested in the landscape, which was not something that was traditionally done back in the Renaissance. You see a little bit of a landscape as a background feature, but this is a very elaborate scene, even with the hunt of the deer going on here behind the main processional figures. So it's indicating kind of growing interest in naturalism, even in stories of events long ago and in countries that would not really have looked like this, I have to admit. This would look more like the hills around Florence. Now, this is a tough one. Yeah, we're running out of time. I almost wanted to leave this one out, but some people really love Hieronymus Bosch. And you might be surprised to learn that Hieronymus Bosch did do an adoration by the Magi. Here they are, the three kings preparing or kneeling already before the baby. Now notice that Mary and the baby, it does look like Mary is the throne on which the baby sits, and the baby sits quite upright like a little king. But the building around them is falling apart. All that holds up this roof that looks like it's about to fall on her is this feeble, dead tree stump. You get the three kings elaborated in a different way, which I'm sure you've seen before, because after a while, not only did they acquire names, Melchior, Balthazar, and Gaspar, but they were said to represent the three continents known at the time. So Europe, Asia, and Africa. So one of the three kings would be shown as black. And you see him here with his retinue. Now, these figures over this side, we don't know a lot about. This is a piece that's in the Prado Museum in Spain. It's called the Prado Epiphany. We think these are the donors and maybe the patron saints, the namesakes of the couple that gave this picture. Back here, supposedly, is poor old Saint Joseph, who's washing the diapers of the baby. That's the interpretation given here, and then drying them in front of a fire at the bottom of this shed. But these strange figures who are crawling here and these more strange figures coming out of the shed are quite disturbing. I think I have close-ups. Let's see. Yes. So we think that this is a rather pessimistic interpretation of this very joyful event. Yes, you have the three kings, but you have someone here who seems to be impersonating a king. In fact, I almost think, although this is not always said, he's holding a crown. Notice that the crowns are very elaborate in shape here. He's holding a crown upside down. It's almost as if he stole it from the mature king who's wearing a kind of armored top to his gown. But this figure has his own crown, which has thorns on it. And basically he's naked so that we can see that he has lesions on his leg. Now, I have to say, this event, this picture is still they're still trying to interpret it, even though it's from 1494. Many people say that this is the Antichrist who would be deceiving those who are looking for the true Christ. And that these people who are climbing in, who seem to be shepherds, who are climbing on top, but who also, I'll go backwards, are peeking through the walls, are people who are only partially seeing the truth. And what they refer this whole scene to is, here, I'm going to go beyond this one, to a scene in which Christ says, I am the good shepherd, and I will protect you. I'm paraphrasing. But do not be confused by the false shepherds who come in the wrong way, through the ceiling or through the walls. There will be many of them, but they are not going to protect you. So it's actually a picture about Christ, the grown-up Christ, as the good shepherd, even though here he's still just a baby. This is a theory. So if you have more theories about this, maybe you'll put your theory in the questions, because I would love to hear another interpretation. To end the story of the three kings, here they are in an old cathedral carving from Autun in France by a man named Giselbertus, famous sculptor of the time. And they're shown sleeping together, huddling together in the cold, but partly so that they can show an angel who's coming to each of them in their dreams. And I've been trying to interpret this. This man is clearly awake. I don't know if the other two are supposed to be still asleep, but the angel, of course, is probably telling them, do not go back to Herod. That would be a big mistake. You've seen the baby now, go back to your own countries and spread the news. And that is what they do. Now, when they leave, it's said that they went on a ship. And I'm going to use that as the segue into this last little bit. I'm sorry, Donna, to go over time, but these are pictures of the legends of St. Nicholas. So these are not the wise men on the ship. This is St. Nicholas of Bari, which was a harbor town, I believe, in Italy, saving people who are about to be shipwrecked. Notice there's even a mermaid down here of sorts in this sea storm picture with very stylized clouds. But St. Nicholas flies in. And I included this one because if you have to try to figure out how did St. Nicholas turn into Santa Claus, it's very clear that in the legends of St. Nicholas, he is able to fly through the sky and come to the aid of those who want him. Now, this is a really odd picture to put in this show. This is called The Wild Hunt. But if you look at mythological interpretations of the origin of Santa Claus, some writers interpret Santa Claus's ride on his sleigh in the middle of the night on Christmas Eve as related to this event called the Wild Hunt, which is supposed to be the ancient god of the Germans, Odin or Wotan, riding chaotically with his crazy followers on a hunt through the sky. And if you were out on a terrible night when the wind was blowing and things were howling and the trees were moving, you had better be careful not to be in the path of this wild hunt, or you would be swept up and taken away forever. Now, the idea is that, again, this is someone who flies through the sky at night. I mean, it's a long step to Santa Claus, but some people say there's a connection. It's a painting by Franz von Stuck. And then other people say, no, there's a much milder connection to St. Nicholas and Santa Claus, because St. Nicholas, who was a bishop, although he's not shown in bishop garb here, took pity on the poor on many occasions. In this occasion, the story was that there was a very poor man who didn't know how he would manage to marry off his daughters, which was expected at the time. He had no dowries to give them. He was afraid he would have to sell them into a kind of slavery. St. Nicholas heard of this, and during the night, while the family was asleep, the father and the three daughters, every night for 3 nights, he threw in a ball of gold, which would provide a dowry for each girl. And I have 2 pictures of this. I love this one, especially because he's on his tiptoe trying to reach in the window. And the father actually wakes up, as does one of the girls, and what's that sound? Is that Santa Claus? But this is the beginning of Santa Claus bringing things down the chimney. So I'm going to end right here because yes, I am over time, and see if you have any questions. Maybe I won't stop the share because you might have questions about the pictures. Are there any questions, Rachel and Donna?
I don't see anything in the chat yet. It's been so amazingly jam-packed,
I know.
Laura, that we've had our heads spinning here and no time to write a question.
I know.
But please, it's been marvelous. Please do put questions in the chat or comments. I am overwhelmed at the variety of depictions, and there are so many figures in the Christmas story that and how many different ways they've been depicted. I'm most I guess surprised.
We'll go back a little
at the paintings where Mary is looking away from the child.
The really early ones, yeah. And part of the idea of that, I'm going to answer a question that you're not even asking yet, I guess. But part of the idea of that, the interpretation given to that, is not that Mary didn't care, but it's to show that Mary did not give birth in the typical way, that she was still virgin. And so, I mean, when they put Joseph to the side, it's again to show he's not involved. And in a way, this is taking Mary out of the equation too, and just making her the vehicle. So in a way, in these interpretations, it's to honor her, to say, no, it was a virgin birth. This was a miracle. But you also see other traditions where she's very much involved with the baby. And as they often talk about too, this sort of development of tenderness as you go into the Renaissance depictions. Like here, there's a kind of regal aloofness and maybe sadness, but then the mother and even St. Joseph become more and more tender and solicitous of the baby as the depictions go on. Do you think?
I do see that. I do. It just was a surprise to me.
Yeah, it was a surprise to me too.
I see that Sandra has in the chat that she had the names of the artists in print so that she could do further research. And do you know, Sandra, that Laura and I discussed that prior to opening up the Zoom tonight, and Laura left am I right on this, Laura? You left the detail like that out because you wanted to make the images as large as possible because there was so much detail in the images.
It's true. Because
so what we decided to do was to make that information available to you with recording tomorrow.
So if hopefully I said the name in each case, if you wanted to write to me, you could write to my email at truelaura@earthlink.net, and I can send you the spellings, because I know some of the names are quite unusual in spelling, and they're not typical Anglo-Saxon names, let's say. But hopefully you'll be able to hear them.
That information tomorrow when we post the recording?
Yes, you could put my email address down.
Okay, so don't put the list of paintings tomorrow. Just put your...
I could do that. That's the other thing I could do, Don. If you want me to write I could just write out all the artists' names. Would that help?
The names of the painting or where refer to the painting, and give us the names of the artists and your contact information. And then I think we can go with that.
Okay, that's good. I can do that.
There's another comment. Mary and Joseph were peasants, so they probably were stunned by the events as well. Question mark. Yes, I'm sure of that.
Yeah, and that was, yes, go ahead.
Say the more modern depictions are much happier. The kind of story that I grew up with.
Yeah. And this is more like a Christmas card. I hate to say it because Correggio is a very famous artist, but it's the kind of thing that the Christmas card artists picked up on, the joy of the event. And, you know, I should also mention, and this is kind of off the subject, when I said that Christmas wasn't initially celebrated, the big holiday initially in the Christian world was Easter. And that's a holiday that has a lot of sadness associated with it, as well as the joy. But then eventually, like around the 300s, Christmas became the joyous holiday. And yet, as I mentioned, even in some of the joyous pictures, there are allusions to the fact that the Christ would eventually be a sacrifice to save
Yes.
people.
Yes. Heidi says, wonderful presentation. Did I hear you say, Laura, that one of these paintings was Giotto?
Yes, yes.
It's more than one, wasn't
There
there?
was more than there were more than the for very first one were my Giottos. This is a Giotto. This is a famous Giotto from the Scrovegni Chapel in Padua, Italy, which is near Venice. And the whole chapel is done by Giotto. And tell me what she asked about Giotto, because I love
There was a
Giotto.
question about, was it there? And she said she has been to, okay, I'm not going to try to say that, the Scrovegni Chapel.
Right, the Scrovegni Chapel. That was the name of the donor who commissioned it. That's where this is from.
It to me, it almost looks like it's frosted and melty. You know what I mean? It's got a very different look to it.
It does. And it's probably because the paint is different. This isn't oil paint, it's fresco. So it's painted into wet plaster and it becomes part of the wall. Here, I shouldn't go on about this, but certain colors, like you see the way her blue robe is very scratched off.
Yes.
That's because that was a color that you couldn't mix with the plaster without it changing color. So that had to be painted on top of the true fresco. And you can see that the true fresco, like the colors of the shepherds and Joseph's cloak and even Mary's red garment, that's staying in good shape. But anything that was added later, like the blue sky and the blue gown, over the years, it's gotten scratched. And unless they want to try to paint over Giotto, which, you know, I would be afraid to do that.
Yes.
It's never going to be quite the same again. But they're
Heidi
very
comments
cool.
that the chapel is overwhelming.
Yes.
I have two questions because I'm waiting for anybody else who wants to fill up the chat. I don't mean to dominate, but I can keep the conversation going.
Okay.
Two things, and let me just say them now because I'm going to forget. In another presentation that you did for us, we discussed when Mary's garments changed from red to blue. And I noticed that there were depictions both ways.
Yes.
Maybe you could share that with us again. And then I also want to talk about the botanical elements that were included here, because you and I have talked about yet another presentation that we would like to do about stained glass windows
Oh,
in
yes.
particular churches. And they often have botanicals in them that are symbolic of various things. So if you could just talk to those 2 points.
Okay, I don't know if I remember the red to blue. It's true that Mary's garments do change in color. And look, but see, she's wearing both. The outer garment is blue, the inner one is red. Oh, I forgot to say this. In St. Bridget's vision, Mary is all in white. So this is very clearly influenced by that vision that the saint had, because these are not her normal colors. Joseph is sort of wearing her normal colors here. Here again, she's in white because it's for St. Bridget. I don't remember. You're going to have to remind me, Donna. Why did the colors change? Did I have a reason?
I don't know, but you know what? If would it be possible that you could look that up for us? And
I'll look it up. I'll see if I can find it. Was it in the
email
goddess
us
lecture?
and we'll post it. You know,
Okay.
it was, remember when we were doing the whole series about
Gods and goddesses?
yeah, gods and goddesses? It was in that.
Okay. I bet it was in. I
They're
will
so
look.
packed with information that it's, you know, I can't commit to memory.
I know,
And
I know. And I obviously can't either, but it's true that the colors change. Now look, this is such a dark blue, you wouldn't even know it's blue, but I think it is blue. Here there's a little red and blue. Here she's in red.
Yeah, that was what was so startling to me,
Yeah.
this picture.
Yeah.
And then the botanicals. There was one
Yeah.
painting that had the obvious botanicals in it. But I didn't really notice them.
In the whole picture. Let me see if I can find
Right,
it.
right.
It's the Portinari altarpiece. I have to find that one. I'm sorry to flip by so quickly. Here, they're right in the center. So there is some attention. And by the way, here's Mary's shoe off to the side. That was another thing, but that she, you know, she partly disrobed for the birth to happen. But yeah, you might not notice them. I mean, this is a huge altarpiece. So even to see it as a slide doesn't really, these would be much bigger if we could see this thing in person. And I think it's in the Uffizi in Florence, which means maybe I did see it sometime. Let me see. Here's the close-up. So yeah, and the carnations, I'm trying to remember what the carnations were for. That was the one I left out. So you caught me in that one too, Donna.
Okay.
I'm gonna go back and look at my
I'll just
notes.
stop for tonight.
No, no, you don't need to stop, but right. So I didn't write it down in my notes. I wrote symbolic flowers of the Portinari altarpiece. All right, I can look up because it bothered me that they didn't mention the carnations. So I'll tell you what the carnations meant. I think it was something like love, just love. Like which seemed like an odd interpretation of a carnation. And I think probably even the vessels, one being clear and one being opaque, that probably had significance too. And you know, this again has to do with birth. I think like the baby being inside and hidden, or you can see through, but I would have to check that out. There's lots of symbolism, lots and lots and lots associated with these pictures. So much that it makes my head spin too. But I'll see if I can find anything more about the flowers there.
That
And
would
yeah,
be,
it's very, very typical. There are lots of Annunciation scenes that I didn't show, where you see the angel outside in the garden and Mary in the building, and outside with the angel are all kinds of flowers that would stand for Mary and her qualities, like her purity, her love, that kind of thing. Yeah, so it's a very rich subject. And I won't
yes.
even get into it now.
Jan says that she saw the iris and the lily in that picture.
Mm.
Are those the carnations in the clear vase?
Yes, they're down
Yeah,
here. I think
okay.
these are supposed to be red carnations.
And then you said the others were violets.
Violets on the ground as a symbol of.
Well, we'll look for more information on that. Not that we want to put you to work, but I'd be eager to find that out if you can pull that together for us. I didn't see any other questions. If anyone has any, please let us know and we'll get you connected to the person who's the expert here and get your questions answered. I think we'll get done for tonight then. Thank you everyone for attending. Please complete the pop-up survey that will appear when the Zoom ends. We always appreciate feedback. And for more information
thanks for the questions too.
For more information on upcoming programs, please visit the LaSalle Public Library program portal. And now I'll turn it back over to Laura for closing comments.
Ooh, closing comments. Well, let me see what I didn't get to. I don't know. I just would encourage people to look at the Renaissance pictures. Partly, I mean, one of the joys of them is just the beautiful color in many cases of these pictures. On a very simple, pleasing level, they were using colors that were, I mean, now I'm getting into like technique, but they ground their own colors. So they were very pure, very lovely colors. Sometimes you even get images that are more flattened because the artist isn't wanting to shade the colors so to let the colors show through. Like here, there's some shading, but a lot of the color is very pure to show the beauty of the color. So I don't know, this is just personal. I love looking at the Renaissance pictures sometimes I feel overwhelmed by all the meanings, but there is a pure visual delight in them that can't be denied. And even, I have to say, I was even excited to get the pictures, where are they, of the sculptures on the cathedral, because, for instance, I had never seen this one before, and I love the way it kind of depicts Herod as a little suspicious and leaning forward while the kings are kind of anxiously sitting up straight, like, oh, okay, we don't know. I mean, and thinking of this as part of, I saw the whole carving, which was much, much bigger, had mountains in the background with the three kings climbing with their retinues up the mountains. Each little part was given such wonderful attention. And I guess it's great that we have books and slides so that we can see these things up close, because from the ground you might not see this unless you had binoculars at the cathedral. So that's my summing up. I don't know, it's sort of odd.
It's wonderful. So thank you everyone for attending, and Laura, it was wonderful, very important for this time of year for us to understand. And as always, we'd love to have you here all the time.
Thank you. We'll have to talk about the stained glass window project.
Yeah, there you go. So
Okay.
Again, to our audience, thank you for joining us. And with that, we'll say good night and have a wonderful holiday.
Bye.